Hello, everybody. Pat Sherwood here with the Varied Not Random podcast. And just like I promised last week, episode 21, packed with so much great information, we had to split it into two parts. So this is episode 22, the conclusion of myself and Adrian speaking with Michele Mootz on training special populations. Before we get on this, you mentioned like a heavy lifting day with seniors. And even though we haven't said it outright, I'm gonna say it now, even though because it's obvious to all three of us, but maybe somebody listening isn't. These people are doing CrossFit. Like they're doing constantly varied function moves at high intensity, and intensity is relative to the individual. You know, for some people, like you said, sitting and standing up is intensity, and it's not laying in a pool of sweat after Fran on the floor, non-communicative and non-ambulatory. You know, it's probably not what we're going for this population. You said seniors and heavy lifting. What a glorious combination of items in that. And you know, when we'll say sometimes who needs to go heavy, everybody does. And this is proof positive that those aren't just empty words. We actually really mean that. So how old are you talking about with people lifting heavy, and what does that look like on a squat or a deadlift or a whatever day?
Our oldest athletes.
If you don't, I want to hear weight belts are going on. They're chest pump. AC/DC's pumping.
Okay. So I have a few good stories about this. Our oldest athletes, we had a group of three that were 97.
Wow, that is so cool.
Yeah, they were still coming in, and they were buddies, so it was cool. But I mean that age range. So our demographic on the seniors was 65 and up. And we didn't have too many towards the lower end of these. I would say the average age in our seniors class was probably 80.
Okay.
Was probably the average age. To enter into, and it was really, think about this from a generational thing, primarily for the women who, when they were being brought up, that was very taboo to lift weights or do any form of exercise. So to now say, here's a barbell, let's go to it. You know, that was so you got to talk them into that from the get-go. But they got into this, and it was funny. Like looking at a couple of the guys that hadn't really done weightlifting since they were, you know, back in the day. So on and so forth. It would be like chest bumps, high fives going on because they were reliving the glory days with all of that.
Awesome.
Having said that, a lot of front-end instruction, obviously, and a lot of scaling that had to happen with things that you don't necessarily think about. One of the big issues we had was shoulder mobility as people age and being able to they can't get the bar on their back in a back squat. I know I'm speaking to the choir.
That'll be me.
So it was finding
Pat,
ways of, totally. It was finding ways. We had a lot more safety bars and we had a lot of things like that and adapting into that stuff and figuring out how to put them under load. But those were probably our busiest days. People loved it. They absolutely loved it.
The safety squat bar is awesome.
Yeah, I got a question, Michele, and this is a layup, but I think we got to pause here and ask it. Okay, so you're previously a physical therapist. You've coached CrossFit for a long time. Why? Why bother lifting heavy with this population? Why?
Oh my God. Because it's their ability to maintain any kind of quality of life was dependent on it. And I used to explain this to them because we got that question a lot from them. Why would I ever do this? How much do you weigh was always my first question to them, because you need to be able to get your body weight from the ground to a standing position if you fall at home. And I need to make sure that you can support your own body weight. And I don't care if that's under a barbell or in a ring row or whatever we happen to be doing that day, it was a light bulb moment for them. Like, oh, like if you can't pull yourself out of a chair, that's a problem. And really relating that back to the things that they were doing every day in life, whether that was an activity. We had a lot of archery that was coming in there, which was interesting. I don't know if there's like a shooting, not a gun shooting, but like an archery shooting range around there. So those are the things, and relating that back to the activities that they wanted to do. And hey, this is going to improve all of that. We preach that all the time. You know, when we teach seminars that like Pat said, nobody should be getting out of this.
Mm-hmm.
It's just relating it to where it makes sense to them, because they think that's a younger person's activity, that they don't need to be doing that anymore. And so to tell them like, hey, if you fall, there's no difference between you being able to support your weight enough to get yourself back to a standing position versus you picking up a deadlift bar.
Did you get any buy-in from talking about the physiology and the response behind it? Like, for example, was there any sort of added gravity to saying, hey, you know what, your bone density is going to improve, you know, your lean muscle mass is going to improve? Did they care about any of that? Or was it more like a raw functionality outside of the gym that seemed to be more inspirational?
Both. We actually had a handful of the women in the seniors class. And keep in mind, this is a population who's going to their physicians on such a frequent basis that most of that they're far more in tune with all of that than someone who's 20, 30, 40 that is maybe going once a year. So most of the women had some form of a bone density test done previous to starting the program. And we had 3 of them that their doctors asked them openly, like, what are you doing? Because they got off all their meds and had totally reversed all of their bone density issues that they were having. So I didn't need to have that conversation because their physician was having that conversation, which in that generation, they don't question anything a doctor tells them. And so it was really, the buy-in at that point was like, my work here is done. I didn't even have to say anything. So the evidence was so far down the road that they wouldn't have questioned it at that point anyway. They could see it and feel it, and it was great. Took care of itself.
It's almost like CrossFit works. Who would have?
Almost like
who would have? But how is that possible?
Like
I heard it was so darn dangerous. This doesn't make any sense.
Crazy.
You know, there's a lot of people when they think 1 rep max, they think eye-popping 1 RM deadlift, shaking like a leaf, takes you 15 seconds to get it up. I've heard some people say, don't do 1 RMs with an older segment of the population. You should only do 3s or 5s or whatnot. What was your experience?
We did it all. Nothing was off the table. I gotta be honest with you. And what that meant was depending on how long you'd been in the program and where you were functionally.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a lot of people deadlifting off plates and boxes. So what? They're still picking weight off the ground. So it was scaled like everything else. But why wouldn't I do a 1 rep max? Why wouldn't I do a snatch? I got asked that a lot.
Really?
You make these people snatch? I'm like, yeah. So, maybe that was with a dumbbell versus a barbell, but why wouldn't you? We had a lot of training bars and, appropriate weights for that. But think about, to me, I think that gets missed a lot with that population, that they're fed this line of avoiding complex movement patterns because it's just too much for you.
Absolutely. Right? Yep.
And my argument was, whoa, hang on. That's exactly what you need to be working on. And so everything that we did, we started every class with the seniors with some form of balance and proprioceptive work and working on all the neuromuscular patterns that were going on there. And that would continue within the class. It changed every day. We were trying to do a lot of walking heel toe. Imagine you're on a straight line, big DUI test. Right? They're all going to fake me because they'll never get arrested. Awesome. And just identifying to them how much of an issue that was within, and I would say seniors, but I think that's just a general population thing. But you can improve your balance. You can improve your proprioception if you work on it. And it went from that to, okay, now get behind a pull-up rig and lift 1 foot off the ground. Now close your eyes, and just up in the ante a little bit with them as they improved. But the theory behind that was, look, if your balance improves, you won't fall. So you won't have to get up off the ground. So it just was taking them back to understanding like why that was so important. And then really reinforcing, we were, again, always going back to the things of why are we doing a clean and jerk? Well, because the complex movement there is really beneficial for you guys to have to think about this. And yes, it's hard. It's hard for me too. It's hard for the 20-year-old. It's hard for a 10-year-old, whatever. It's just, it's okay for it to be hard. And if you stop trying to do that stuff, then we lose capacity in it. So they, at that point, had kind of like, okay, we'll do whatever you ask us to do. But it was always with an understanding of why. I mean, we were pretty proficient at going back to relating it to things they were doing at home and making sure they understood that we're doing this because fill in the blank.
So I love that. So if I kind of think about that in a more general sense, everything was on the table. The question was just, how do you establish trust, first of all, to make sure that, you know, people are going to come along with you. And then, you know, just setting the table, so to speak, and making sure that you don't dive in too fast and too hard. But if those two things were respected, it was all available to you. That's kind of
absolutely.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. And I think it, you know, as the program progressed, and especially again with the seniors, where we probably would have gotten more pushback on stuff like a snatch or an overhead squat. You know, the new people would walk in and go, well, shoot, everyone else is doing it, so I guess this is what we do. I mean, it was almost just okay. And there was never, I mean, if there was an injury, obviously, like any traditional gym, you're going to work around it. And the weights, it wasn't like we were throwing around, you know, 155 pounds at an overhead squat. It was a training bar, but you're still having to work through that range of motion and that capacity and really developing that. And it was awesome to watch the change in mobility and function just by being introduced to those things.
The organism has to be challenged, you know, and whatever the appropriate challenge is, you're not going to get the benefit if you just stay comfortably in your box and don't challenge it. You should have printed on the wall that Glassman quote of, you know, the needs of our grandparents and Olympic athletes differ by degree, not kind. I mean, you were the living personification of precisely that. You've got somebody down the street training for the games doing CrossFit, and then your special population doing CrossFit, you know, but we're just slicing the pie in a little bit of a different way depending upon who's in the class.
Well, and there was nobody that was more aware of that than Greg. Let me just tell you that. And he was a frequent visitor of that program because I think in his mind, like, yes, that's it. That's what this is. That's what it should look like if that's the target population that you're going for. And I think just watching, I mean, this, honestly, you guys, it was an experiment. It's just, hey, is this even going to work? And holy crap, did it work, right? And now let's start collecting data on exactly what we're seeing with that. And just, you know, it could have been an epic fail. It wasn't. So,
and not only did it work, but I would think, for lack of a better way to say it, it would almost work better than with most people. And what I mean by that is if you have somebody walk in who's already a great athlete, there's not a lot of room left to grow and develop. But you have somebody come in who's extremely deconditioned, who's extremely everything. The sky's the limit. I mean, we're going to literally change your life, whereas we get this person from a 230 800-meter dash to a 221. Like, great, you know, super, but you know, not with these people. I mean, you literally saved some folks' lives. That's incredible.
Absolutely.
I think you can think about it the same way as like poverty. You know, if you have somebody who's living in abject poverty and you give them $10,000, like that's like the whole world right there. That's a life-changing amount of money, and certainly it's no small amount for anybody. But if you talk to somebody who's got $1 million in the bank, and you're like, hey, here's 10 grand. The impact that that's going to have on them directly is so much smaller. I think it's exactly what Pat just said, right? Like on the physical side, you see the same thing.
Absolutely.
But Michele, I just want to highlight, like, I love so much this attitude that is, this is for you. It doesn't matter where you are in life. This is for you. And on the flip side, I just have to point out how much I detest the insidious nature of the inverse of that. And I feel like so many people get suckered into it and they believe that, oh, this is not for you. This is for somebody else. This is too hard. This is too complex. This is too something. This is for other people. And I reject that attitude in almost anything in my life. And I hope that people that are working in this space, you know, the CrossFit world more largely, have that attitude of like, no, this is for everybody. And this can be applied and it has the benefit that we've been talking about. And it's worth it, you know. And I think you guys are such a powerful case that proves that. So hats off to you guys. It's awesome.
I appreciate that. I think for me, it was, I know both of you had kind of seen the white wall that we created in the gym that was evidence of that, where people would come in and pull me aside or one of the coaches aside and be telling us these things that were happening in their life. And it just dawned on us one day, like, we need to be writing this down. Like, this needs to be just in the face of everybody that walks in this gym. And so there was, just for the audience, there was a wall. It was just stark white in the gym. And I put out a bunch of Sharpie markers and we split it in half. The things that the goals you have and the things you've accomplished. And it would bring a tear to my eye every time I would read it, because it wasn't like, got a 350-pound deadlift. None of that was on this wall. It was, I didn't sell my house because I can go up and down my stairs now. It was, I can lift up my grandchildren. I can buy dog food at the grocery store now because I can lift the bag. It was just stuff that you go, oh my God. So when we say this is for everyone, I agree with you. I think the underlying note is that CrossFit had a reputation of being, whether that was the games or social media or what people had been exposed to, that you had to be in shape before you did it. That was only for young people, that you had to be fit before you did that stuff. And so to really throw that back and say, absolutely not, that this is evidence that when we say this is appropriate for everybody and scalable, and that you can't argue the results that we got. And there were no sicker people or older people than the ones we were getting in that program. And so I just think that's an excuse like anything else. Yeah. And if you don't want to do it, then don't do it, but don't make excuses for it, because that's crap. And I have no patience for that either. So that just never sat well with me either. So it was awesome to have the opportunity to actually put that into play.
I have a handful of things I'd like to shotgun you with.
Oh, thanks. Okay, the Jeopardy trial round.
Okay, just
speed round.
And just because maybe there are some trainers listening to this and they're starting to buy in, and they're like, oh, it does sound rewarding. It does sound cool. Like, I see. But so I'm going to throw some classic workouts at you that every trainer would know what they would do, or their normal scale, so to speak, but you had to work differently. So what would just some things that would pop in your mind when I say now, Fran, right? We're going to do thrusters and kipping chin over bar pull-ups. What are some things that maybe you've seen work for those two movements with that? What would Fran look like in the special population? I'm sure there's 1,000 examples, but what's one or two?
Lighter loads, obviously, that's the easiest scale to go to, are dumbbells for sure. Maybe squatting to a box and then up, or just getting like a plate from their shoulders to overhead was great. Pull-ups, we would, for those that it was appropriate, ring row. I think that's traditional standard scale, and that works great in the gym. But if you can't support your weight, then it was PVC, and we would have them sitting on a bench and they're pulling down to their chest, and you can make those very challenging. So we're still getting the push-pull that would happen in Fran on just a... So
for anyone who can't envision that, I think I've seen what you're talking about when you did it. You would have them maybe sit on a box under a pull-up bar. You'd put a resistance band over the pull-up bar, loop it through the PVC pipe, and so they would pull it down. They would get themselves almost like a lat pull-down, so to speak, but using the resistance band. And you can, like you said, a great way to do pull-ups and make it as challenging as you want, depending upon how many bands you throw on there.
Yeah, the majority of the people we had in our classes could not hang on a pull-up bar. They can't support their body weight from a hanging position. So it was, again, just, can we go back, even on a ring row? Like, that was just too much on them. So to be able to deload that a little bit, and again, just take it back to what the function of it. It's still a pull, right? Great. I mean, that worked really effectively for most of those people.
What about a workout that involves running?
So running, we would allow them to do some form of power walking, obviously, if that was a little bit more appropriate and the impact was too much. We would scale just like anything else. They can still bike. They could still do all of the things that you would scale appropriately in a gym that I think is a little bit more traditional. We did have some people that, because of weight parameters, and this is, I had to learn this, your rowers, the weight capacity on a rower was less than some of the participants we had in the gym. So doing things like putting a bench over the top of a rower and letting them sit on that and go through the pole.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Was
I wouldn't have even thought of that.
Yeah, I just would take like the bench press benches and stick them over the top of it so they could support the load, and they would still be able to row within that. Okay. So it worked pretty well. Yeah.
I got two in that same vein at shotgun style. So we were talking lifting before. What was the favorite lifting movement for this group? Like, what were they always fired up to do? And then second,
Deadlift.
generally, okay, deadlift is that easy? Deadlift is like the moneymaker. Okay. And then second question is, what would you say was like the most common go-to movement? Like what would you find yourself programming kind of more than anything?
Oh,
and maybe the answer is deadlift. I don't know.
What would I program more than anything? Kettlebell swings.
Okay.
I think it was a really effective one where they could still move some weight and the intensity piece was always there for them, which was good. It was like the 1-2 punch. I don't know that there was one overriding program. We were at the time following .com. And so we would adjust based on what the programming was on .com. And if I had to switch some stuff, but they did the open, they did all of that stuff. So, I mean, it wasn't like I was solely doing the programming for that. So it was really based on that. Let me flip it.
How about the most avoided movement?
Overhead squats.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it was very challenging. And so it was one of those days that you kind of had to like send out okay, everyone, overhead squats are Thursday, gear up. Make sure you come in with extra coffee. Yeah. And I wouldn't say we did a lot of overhead movements, but to do like a push press was way easier because you've got all the momentum helping you to be able to support that load overhead. Just looked very different. And it was okay that the elbows were bent in there, the Pat Sherwood style overhead.
I was just going to say, what's wrong with that? Works like a champ.
Where it was like, cool. Okay. And keep in mind, that went all the way down to, we had a couple of our older seniors towards the top end that couldn't even get their hands above their head. So then it became, okay, can you take a 5-pound plate? And we had the giant 5-pound plates. So they had a little bit of width on them. And can you just hold it up here? And we would do a static hold to try to get that and then come back down. So when I say scaling, it's like they weren't squatting with that weight. They're trying to get the weight up over their head and try to gain some mobility and function back. So it looked nothing like an overhead squat day in a traditional gym, which was great, which was absolutely great. So, but they were still having to challenge themselves in that regard.
What if the workout of the day had jumping rope in it?
Oh God, I love that question. So a couple things we came up with jumping rope, one of which was a plate jump versus a rope where they could trip on it. So if they were still getting some form of a jump, that was great. However, we had a lot of people that could not jump with their full body weight, whether that was because they were heavy, right, and couldn't do that, or just too frail to do that. So we would do what's called a box jump. And so we would stack the boxes up to about belly button height, maybe a little higher. They would place both hands on a corner of the box.
Okay. For support.
And then lean into it. So they're still lifting both feet. It was almost like a hip hike off of the box. Both feet are still coming off the ground. They're still getting a jump out of it, but they're supporting some of their body weight on the box.
Okay.
It
Very
was
cool.
Awesome to watch that. So you could do it with 2 boxes too and have them lift their feet off the ground, but they were getting too much help with 2 boxes. So we kind of went back to just a single box mechanism. It was awesome.
I've got a couple more questions here. So you touched on this earlier, and I think it was when Boz asked the question about, is a younger trainer an appropriate trainer for this population, et cetera, et cetera. And you made a comment about, well, yes, as long as they don't think that everything's about intensity or something like that. So, we're used to doing workouts for time, and it's 21:59 for time. And that's what it is. Were you doing workouts for time? What did intensity look like for this segment of the population?
Yes, we did workouts for time. I might extend the time domain a little bit or change the time domain a little bit. What I mean by that is there might be a minute rest or a 30-second rest placed in between some of these rounds to allow them to kind of take everything down a little bit.
Oh, I like that.
Time was not, well, yeah, me too.
I'm gonna start doing that.
He's like, wait a minute.
I feel like I do that naturally.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right? Yeah, so think like a 20-minute AMRAP. And we did long workouts like that where we would say, okay, so every 3 minutes, we want a 30-second or a 1-minute rest. So 3 on, 1 off for the next 20 minutes. So it's just changing that parameter a little bit to let them kind of bring their heart rate back down again. I won't say that intensity was our sole focus. It wasn't. It was movement, range of motion, trying to work through that stuff. and paying attention, because you did have people that were trying to work way above where they should be. And it was always kind of that check-in of, can you talk to me in the middle of a workout?
And if you
with
can't,
that, which is good, then we
let's
need to take a
slow it
little
down.
walk outside. And there was definitely some people that I'd be like, hey, let's take a little walk outside and then come back in and hit it again. And you just have to be mindful that, the bleary eyed that we can both, and all three kind of like take a couple breaths and come out of, they can't. So it's just being on your A game. I got to be honest with you, and knowing that that's important, but it shouldn't be foremost in your mind with this. And it was evident when we first brought in coaches, because we had a whole guest coaching program where we would bring coaches in and have them teach just a warm up, and then they would run a workout. And inevitably, it was always kind of, I'd check in with them the day before and like, whatever your warm up is, cut it in half. Just cut it in half. I'm just going to tell you that right now, because they come in with this long list. I'm like, oh God, no, that's not going to end well. And just rethinking like, hey, wait a minute. It's okay to like, I'd give them a movement or two and then, hey, let's chat for a second and not even tell them we're going to rest. Because then we can do it. It was implement those rest periods in a really sneaky way, so that you're trying to keep them engaged in the class and you're still bringing the heart rate down. And so we would do that pretty frequently, where I would talk way longer than I needed to, because I can see that they're all turning red. So, that kind of stuff was just paying attention to the feedback.
Something else that you and your trainers did that I thought was spectacular, and I don't know if it would be feasible for a traditional affiliate to do, but maybe it paid big dividends and it's worth it. And you haven't mentioned it yet, which is this would probably occur after you got to know the folks in your class and their limitations and what they could do and what the workout of the day was going to be. But, back in the day, I might walk down into the gym. You're about to run a class. The class is going to show up, let's say maybe in 5 to 10 minutes. And you and your trainers have already set up everybody's individual station for what they're going to need for their scale or modification. They haven't even walked in the door yet, and it's taken care of. Like, they didn't have to do it. What was the thought process behind that? Is that something you'd recommend to other gyms?
I think it's a stylistic choice for us. It was, some of it was just that the classes had gotten so big that it was time saving more than anything else. And we would, there was also that element of, on the days when we maybe didn't have as many movements, that we would allow them to explore a little bit more with those scaling options, but that wasn't always the case either. So it was kind of a case by case basis, but it definitely enabled us to fit the class within the hour that we had, because I think that can be very challenging if you're, there's some things that I think were so different in teaching these classes that you can't teach in a line, right? You have a lot of people with hearing impairments. And so if we tried to teach the class in a giant line, that never worked, because the people down at the ends never heard what we were saying. So to have the gym set up like that, it was okay, now collapse in around me. And I want you guys like look in their eyes and have them speak slower than you think you need to. And that wasn't in a condescending way. It was so that we were making sure the instructions were understood. And those are the considerations that I think we learned as we went, that if I would have taught the way I normally teach in a class, I would have been an hour and a half class, which wasn't feasible. So it was more as a time saving thing, that we were understanding that those parameters eat up time if you weren't paying attention, for sure.
Let's address the potential, heaven forbid it ever happens, elephant in the room, which is, do you need to be prepared to handle a real life emergency situation with this segment of society? And if so, what do you do? What should maybe a traditional gym looking to implement this? If they're already a regular gym and following their insurance protocols and what they have to have, are they good to go, or is there something else you'd recommend?
Ultimately, yes, I would say they're covered. As a trainer, you should be CPR and AED certified anyway. But when we did start bringing in guest coaches, that was one of the aspects that we talked about. Was it's not a if, it's a when situation with this group. So we did have multiple emergency situations that happened in the gym. Everything from just overexertion, where we would have someone faint, pass out, go unconscious, to we actually had to use the AED on a couple occasions. So I think that's a risk in even a traditional gym.
Absolutely.
So I would tell any coach, if you're not prepared for that, you shouldn't be coaching, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Right.
The difference is it's probably going to happen a little bit more prevalently if you're not paying attention with these people, because when it did happen, it happened in a split second. And it's just, if you're not ready and willing to jump in and help in that situation, then don't coach this population, because that we had 2 people that we actually brought them back. Like, their heart stopped. So that was okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that some of it's medication wise. They're on far more medications than a lot of the people we deal with in a traditional gym. And that has a huge effect on how these workouts implement them. And both of those cases that I'm talking about, they had just changed some of the dosages on their meds. And so,
interesting.
It's a tricky thing where, paramedics were like, whoa, okay, hang on. And I kept files right there. So if there ever was an emergency, we could tell the paramedics, here's the meds they're on, here's the dosages they're on. This was just changed, because it was a constant data collection of that stuff, because you can save someone's life knowing that.
So somebody that, has that circumstance they're confronted with, and I'm talking about the trainer now, they're in the gym, that happens. I think it's easy for people to gravitate towards this mentality of, oh, well, that right there means that the program is risky enough that we shouldn't be doing it.
Right. Yeah.
So how would you counteract that attitude? Because I know, obviously, my belief is that no, the risk is worth it for all these other benefits. But how do you stop that one kind of magnified moment in somebody's mind from being the dominant thought? And then how do you have a coach that might be a little bit, freaked out by something like that? How do they recover and get back to the game afterwards?
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately there's a risk in everything that you do, right? You could die crossing the street, for crying out loud. And I think it's, I do think that the benefits that these people saw within their quality of life, and a lot of them got completely off of their meds. So that was huge. So that risk, I think they all understood that coming into it. I don't think there was ever anything. We were not, again, pushing people past where they were ready to go. And in the cases I'm speaking of, this was not like super high intensity Fran day that these happened on. This was just something had been adjusted on the other side. And this was a reaction. Well, that could happen anywhere. Wouldn't have mattered if they were at the gym or at the grocery store. I thank God, and both of them would attest to this, that they were where they were, where they had people that knew how to help them. And we acted on it so quickly. So I think both of them would tell you it was a blessing that they were at the gym doing that stuff, because their lives were saved. But so that was kind of the first piece of that. I think coaches, there's an emotional aspect to that with any population. And if you've ever been in a gym where something catastrophic has happened, I don't know that there's a way around that. And there is definitely an emotional piece to that. But it was also pretty cool to watch these people have an event like this within our classes, both of which were hospitalized for a couple of days, and they came right back.
Wow. Came back to the gym. That's awesome.
There was not even a question of, well, this is too much, I'm not going to do this. It was, when can I get back to working out?
That's awesome. And that right there has to be a huge testament to the benefit that they personally saw from being a part of this program. Because I believe that people get really comfortable with this idea of slow degradation, no matter how bad, is acceptable as long as you don't have a pinpoint incident along the way that can be negatively viewed. You see it all the time. It's like, man, the end state is atrocious. But because it was a slow decline, I'm not really concerned about it. But that one bad fall or that one thing that I can point to, that now becomes a risk that is too far. And again, I find that attitude to be not only just strange, but it's so limiting in terms of what you can reverse, what you could achieve, all of these good things that we know. So that's awesome that on a personal level, you saw, hey, you know what? They might not even be able to articulate what was so powerful about this stuff, but it was good enough that even after this incident, they're like, that's where I need to be, is back in the gym. That's amazing.
It was amazing. And I think, this is a generation too, just to kind of touch on what you said, Boz, that's been fed this line of everything in moderation and don't put yourself at risk. Don't do fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
And so to take even the stance of, well, I'm going to do it anyway, even though maybe my doctor's not all on board. And trust me, we had a lot of physicians that were trying to talk these people out of going. That was a major issue we had to deal with. And my response was always, hey, I'm not your doctor, and you have a relationship with your doctor, but let your body tell you what is working for you. Is your quality of life improving? Have you noticed a difference in the things you're doing outside? And I think there was no overriding of anything a physician was saying. It was just, hey, use your best judgment on this stuff. And you can tell if you're feeling better and your quality of life is improving. That was
how many of those doctors 6 months later had the same attitude?
Only one. And he was a cardiologist, which I think notoriously just, it was never going to be a winning battle. Let me put it that way. It wasn't. To me, it was someone who misunderstood what the program was. And so that lack of communication, and I actually reached out to him directly just to have a conversation. Like, just want you to understand, I had invited every physician into that program. Open door.
Oh, cool.
Come watch what we're doing.
Oh, that's
Anytime.
awesome.
And we actually had a few of them that did that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Which it was like, hey, let's have a physician open house. Come and watch. No pressure. Just sit in the back of the room and watch what these people are capable of doing and what they're doing, to just give them a little bit more of a, okay, we're not, running people into the CrossFit Games for crying out loud.
But outside of that one cardiologist, is it accurate to say that, of the doctors that had trepidation of these people starting, 6, 7, 8 months later, there was a small percentage that still had those same fears after they saw the benefit on the other end?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And
I think
that's what I would expect. But
absolutely. Yeah. And to see them again, you can't argue when someone no longer needs medication. Now it's just science, which I realize in our current climate doesn't mean anything, but in the real world where science means something, right? Like, okay, those numbers, you can't argue with that. And
well played.
It was well played.
Sorry. I just, it was, I don't know. It was really cool to watch that. And I think, how much better did they feel being in a place where they didn't have to be on those pharmaceuticals?
Yeah.
That was one of our goals for sure in the program.
I've got one more question for you, Michele.
Shoot.
Actually, two, if you'll indulge us, if you have the time. So the first one kind of goes back to this topic you mentioned, where you had this goal board and people writing down things that they, were able to achieve now in the gym. And I think that's super cool. And so my question around that is, what, in your observation, really inspired this group? Was it stuff that they could do personally or that they saw their peers doing? Was it people outside of their peer group that could do things that they aspired to? Like, what was the primary inspiration for a lot of these people that you would hear about?
Definitely the goals were personal in nature, although the wins within the community were huge, and the support system that they gave to each other was amazing. There wasn't so much of an emphasis put on the outside successes. So while they admired all of those athletes, and again, think about the coaches that were teaching this program. Those were all very well-established athletes in their own right. It was not, and it was one of the things that I think we learned as we went was, I'll give you an example. When we would do demo for the workout movements, it was always done with really light loads, because one of my things was they don't care that you can throw a bunch of weight around. That means nothing to them.
That's a good point.
I want you to be able to, like that's just, at that point, it's almost disheartening.
Just kind of meet them where they are.
Meet them where they are and show it with an 18-pound kettlebell, because that's what they're going to be using. And that is fine. So it was kind of rethinking our framework and then allowing them goals that were, some of which were very attainable and some of which were a reach, and pushing them towards that. Like, okay, well, it's easy to say, here's the easy goal, but what about the one that you aren't totally sure you can get? That's the one I want you to write up on the whiteboard. And seeing them be able to achieve that stuff was super cool. I mean, it just was, I think you're proving to people that they can do way more than they're capable of. And that happens in every traditional gym too, but this is, again, on just a different level.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really the intent there, was that I wanted to publicize the things they were pulling me aside and whispering in my ear. And I'm like, I should not be the only one hearing this stuff.
Yeah.
This should not just be held for me. I want everyone to celebrate this stuff, because that's, holy cow, I got off soda. That's a big deal in someone's life. And so let's celebrate that. Yeah.
Okay. I got one more final question. So we've been talking about this group of people, and, it's a challenge, obviously, but seems like it's a hugely rewarding path to walk down. After being immersed in that world for so long, what new ideas or approaches did working with this group kind of instill in you, so that when you get back to working with other athletes, what changed? How did it affect your approach when you got back to just kind of your normal, middle-aged gym goer who wants to be a little bit fitter?
One of the things I think, scaling options, obviously I got very proficient at that, but it was how you approach introing options that will work for everyone in a more traditional setting. And what I mean by that was, I think sometimes we wait for people, whether it's in a warm up or a workout, to stand there and look at you like, you haven't given me an option that works for me. I was super guilty of that. Like, okay, well, I'll do my whiteboard brief and here's the scaling options for today. Well, what happens to the person that isn't appropriate for? They're left there looking at you going, well, what about me?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I definitely took from that was, don't wait for that, and give everybody an option that will work for them. Everybody. So when I now go through a warm up, it's, hey, we're doing inchworms. If you can, put your hands on the ground, walk out, and bring your feet back to your hands. If that won't work for you, then I want you to just take a step forward, do a good morning, and stand back up again. If that won't work for you, then I want you, and just give that in the intro, so that you don't have that deer in the headlights of, oh, well, I'm the person that's so far gone that there's not even a scale for me, because that's what's going on in their head. And I got much, much better at addressing that right out of the get-go. Much more inclusivity, for sure, when you do it that way versus the person that feels like they don't belong.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
And I didn't think I had any more questions. This is a really quick one. This is a really quick one, and then we'll wrap it up. Just for the gym owner who maybe is thinking, okay, I'm going to do this. For this segment of the population, did you find any hours of the day were ideal to run the classes?
Our seniors class was at 10 a.m. I think that was a good time. I always kind of thought they would veer earlier, which was not the case.
Okay. All right. Good to know.
Yeah. 10, 11 a.m. was definitely our sweet spot, where that was, they had their morning coffee, whatever it was that went on. But man, that was the magic hour for sure. Having said that, I think if the goal is that we're offering them an hour within your gym that is dedicated to them, I would also be mindful that they're not walking in at the end of beast mode hour, where people are throwing a bunch of weights and they feel like, oh, Jesus. So I think that you're dealing with a population that will make those adaptations based on where they're going to be comfortable. And if that's 2 p.m, so be it, where it's quiet and they have the gym to themselves, because that part is also, if music's bumping and they can't hear, this is just not where they want to be. So create an environment that makes them feel like you actually want them there. And that was key.
Tell you what, I'm right there with them. I don't want to get a migraine headache with the music when I'm working out. I'm already there. I'm already there.
There's a balance, right? I don't want to hear myself breathing either. So I'm like, oh, yeah, I get it.
Well,
I get it.
Let's end on this. I'll let you get back to your day, which, by the way, thank you for being so gracious and giving us like an hour and a half of your time. If there are trainers or gym owners that are now like, yeah, it's super cool, any just parting words, any advice for somebody advice to start, I guess?
Yeah. Start, right? I mean, I think there are some strategies that will help along the way. I think if you can offer specific times or specific classes maybe that are focused on these populations, it's going to be really, really helpful, both populations. again, if they've had a very negative experience in a gym, they don't want to walk in with a bunch of fit people. That's already what they've experienced. So allow them to have dedicated hours within your gym. I realize that's a big ask, but if think about the numbers we just talked about, you're talking about a huge increase in your membership if you're willing to make those adjustments in your schedule. And that's huge. And be willing to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
And that's part of the learning process. I made a ton of mistakes. I'm like, well, that's not what I wanted. Crap. We got to go back and start all over again. And I think there's no right way to do this. I think there's just figuring that out with whomever ends up coming into your class. And I say this all the time at the seminars. Look at the person standing in front of you. One of the biggest mistakes I see coaches make is that this book right here says that I have to do A and then B and then C and then D. And if it doesn't go that way, oh my God. And instead, God, just address the person in front of you. They're a human being. And I think if coaches get to that point, then the rest of it will just fall into place.
Authorize yourself to deviate from the plan.
Yeah.
100%.
Sure.
Boz, anything else you got, man?
No, I just want to say thanks, Michele. As Pat said, I mean, this is so generous of you to give up so much of your time. And I know that this is hugely valuable information for a lot of people, not just, coaches that want to get into this, but the people that genuinely need this type of training. I just think it's not as available as it can and should be. So thank you for helping get it out there.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me. I could talk about this all day, as you both know. So,
well, we might have to have you back. We might have to have you back.
Absolutely.
Anytime. Definitely
I'll say as I do.
Heart lies in coaching.
I'll say as I do at the end of all these episodes, if you're listening to it in a podcast, that's awesome, fantastic. Thanks for your support. But go to the Beyond the Whiteboard YouTube channel, check this out, and post some comments. Boz and I read them. If you're interested in training this population, if there's something we didn't address, we should have Michele back on. Anything you write in there, we want to know. Is there something that you do train this segment of society and you found this work really well? Leave it there in the comments so that other people can learn from it. And we will absolutely give that our time and attention. But Michele, you are awesome. And thank you.
Thanks,
really
boys.
Appreciate it.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. Happy to hang out with you guys. So thanks for having me on.